You ever have a moment where the person you trusted most looks you dead in the eye, and you realize they're not really looking at you at all? I was sitting on the edge of our bed, my voice quiet, almost pleading. It's been a month, Laura. Not even a kiss goodnight. I kept my eyes on her, hoping that saying it out loud might break through the distance that had grown between us. She didn't even flinch. Instead, Laura, my wife of 8 years, the woman I used to believe was my home, exhaled slowly and said with a scoff, "That's not what makes a family, Mark." Her words didn't just land, they carved. I blinked, stunned into stillness. She stood in the soft amber glow of the bedside lamp, arms crossed, chin raised like she'd just delivered some moral truth. But what she really delivered was a slap in the face, wrapped in righteousness. "That's not what makes a family," I repeated, voice thick with disbelief. She turned, already walking toward the door. "You act like I'm supposed to perform just because you feel neglected. Maybe try connecting emotionally instead of checking the calendar." The door clicked shut before I could respond. I heard her settle onto the couch in the living room. Her new retreat, apparently. Lately, she'd been ending more nights out there than in our bed. I stared at the empty pillow beside me, the sheets still tucked in tight on her side. Funny how cold a bed can feel, even when only one person leaves it. I lay back in the dimness, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead, useless against the chill forming between us. And I kept thinking, how did we end up here? Not that long ago, we were the couple people pointed to and said, "Now that's love." We bought this house in Glendale, a simple 3-bedroom with creaky floors and a backyard big enough for barbecues we never got around to hosting. I'd work my 9 to 5 at the insurance office, come home with takeout, and she'd greet me with that smirk of hers, pretending not to be hungry. We had traditions. We had inside jokes. We had each other. But now, she didn't even look back. I rolled over, the lamp casting my shadow on the wall like a stranger watching me sleep. I tried to reason with her, to be patient. But tonight it all caught up. That need for connection, for warmth, for something real, and getting hit with a lecture instead. I wasn't perfect. I'm the kind of guy who keeps his socks in pairs and his regrets in silence. But I loved her. At least I thought I did. Until lately, when I started questioning whether she ever really let me love her, or if I was just a role she cast and forgot to rewrite. You ever feel your heart crack open just a little? Not from something explosive, but from the weight of what's missing? That night, in the quiet hum of the bedroom, I realized something. The silence between us, it wasn't temporary. It was permanent. And something told me, the real betrayal hadn't even shown itself yet. The thing about silence is, it doesn't stay contained in a room. It spills into mornings, into routines, into the space between a husband and wife who once shared everything, even their toothpaste. 3 days had passed since that night in the bedroom. Laura still slept on the couch, though slept might be too generous. Most mornings, I'd find her with a phone resting on her chest, blue light still glowing. Instagram open, smiling at strangers who didn't know her truth. She hadn't mentioned our fight. Not once. She'd moved through the house like nothing was wrong, brushed her hair, scrolled her phone, laughed, loudly, at texts that made no sense to me. Meanwhile, I stayed later at work. Not for deadlines, not for promotions, just to avoid going home. I told myself it was harmless, sending a few extra emails, grabbing dinner with coworkers. But in truth, I just couldn't face the quiet disappointment that now echoed through our halls. It's funny how quickly affection turns into absence. She used to text me little things during the day, jokes about our weird neighbors, or what our cat knocked over. Now, hours would pass, and if I messaged her something, even just a "how's your day," I'd get a thumbs up or a K. Once, she was the first person I wanted to talk to after anything happened. Now, I caught myself typing out a thought, something mundane like they replaced the vending machine again, and stopping, because she wouldn't care. Or worse, she'd care so little she wouldn't pretend. So I started texting other people, old college friends, a few guys from the gym, just to remember what it felt like to have a normal conversation. Nothing flirty, nothing dramatic, just connection. That's when I realized I was craving warmth like someone stuck in a blizzard, and the person I married was handing me ice. One night, I got home late. She didn't ask where I'd been. She barely looked up from her phone. I set down my keys a little louder than usual, just to see if she'd react. She didn't. Instead, she said, "Can you take the trash out before bed?" Like we were two roommates splitting a lease. And that was it. No hi. No how was your day? Just a to-do list from a woman who used to curl into me when thunderstorms rolled through. Later, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the fridge covered in magnets from trips we used to take. Vegas, Aspen, that one disastrous camping weekend where we left early because she couldn't stand the mosquitoes. Each magnet felt like a relic from a life that didn't belong to us anymore. I poured a glass of water and sat down at the counter. Laura was on the couch, laughing, but not with me. With whoever was on the other end of that call. I watched her for a minute. The way she twirled her hair. The way her voice softened when she said, "You always know what to say." She hadn't spoken to me like that in months. Maybe I imagined it, but I could have sworn her eyes darted toward me just then, like she knew I was watching. Like she wanted me to hear. She didn't stop talking. Just kept laughing quietly, like I wasn't there. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I didn't even pretend to. I carried my pillow into the guest room and shut the door. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, just like I had nights ago, I knew something was breaking. Not because we shouted or fought, but because we didn't. And honestly, that scared me more. It was a Tuesday, one of those cloudy, nondescript days where the sky couldn't make up its mind. I sat on the bench press at my usual gym, arms heavy, chest tighter than it should have been after just one set. "Man, you good." That was Evan, the guy I spotted 3 times a week and occasionally swapped stories with. He was the kind of friend who didn't pry, but always noticed. I hesitated. Then I shook my head. No, not really. He set down his weights and sat on the edge of the bench across from me, elbows resting on his knees. "You want to talk?" And I did. Not all of it. Just enough. I told him how Laura barely acknowledged me anymore. How the silence in our home had become its own kind of noise. I didn't mention the couch or the text messages or the night that cracked something in me. I just said it felt like I was slowly fading into the background of my own life. Evan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. "Sounds like you're bleeding out in slow motion." That line stuck with me. Then he added, "You need to take space, man. Not run, not cheat, not blow it all up. Just pull back. Give yourself breathing room." I didn't say anything right away. "Move into the guest room," he continued. Not out of spite, just to draw a line. Sometimes, when they stop seeing you, the only way to remind them you're still there is to go invisible on purpose. It was the kind of advice that sounded like it came from experience. That night, I didn't even glance toward the living room when I got home. Laura was there, of course, on the couch, watching some drama series with the volume too loud. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. I brushed my teeth, grabbed a spare blanket, and walked straight to the guest room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't sigh loudly or try to make a point. I just closed it quietly. And let me tell you, silence hits different when you choose it. The guest room was small, just a full-size bed, a desk we never used, and a lamp with a flickering bulb I'd always meant to fix. I lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for something. Nothing came. No knock. No text. Not even a passive-aggressive "so you're sleeping there now" from the hallway. The next few nights followed the same script. I'd come home, eat quietly, retreat to the guest room. She didn't question it. If anything, she seemed relieved. And that was the worst part. Because deep down, I'd hoped the distance would spark something in her. Regret, anger, even mockery. Anything to prove I still existed in her eyes. But all I got was peace. Detached, indifferent peace. I spent more time at the gym. Started eating lunch with coworkers instead of rushing home. I even picked up running again, just around the block, just enough to burn through the buzzing inside my chest. The days turned into something functional. Not good, not tragic, just numb. Then one evening, as I left the gym after a particularly long stretch on the treadmill, I heard someone call out behind me. "Hey, Mark." I turned. It was Amy, Laura's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in months. She smiled, walking up in her oversized hoodie and sneakers, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Didn't expect to see you here. You look tired." I gave a weak smile. "That obvious?" She tilted her head, her tone gentle. "You okay?" And for a moment, I almost answered. But instead, I said, "Getting there." Amy studied me with a kind of softness I didn't realize I needed. And in that brief, quiet moment outside a gym parking lot, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Seen, not as a failure, not as a husband on the decline, just as a man. The birthday party was for someone down the street, a guy named Joel who grilled steaks and overseasoned chicken like it was a competitive sport. I didn't even want to go, but Laura insisted we make an appearance. Can't have the neighbors talking, she'd said, brushing past me without eye contact. So we went. Together, technically. But when we arrived, Laura drifted off almost instantly, cocktail in hand, blending into a circle of loud laughter and clinking glasses. I stood by the cooler, nodding at familiar faces, sipping warm soda, because I didn't trust myself with a drink in my hand. It was just past sundown, and twinkle lights draped across the patio gave everything a soft, golden haze. People laughed, kids ran around with glow sticks, and the smell of barbecue lingered like a comfort I couldn't feel. I spotted Laura across the yard. She was standing in a small circle, Joel, his wife, 2 other neighbors, and Amy. And then I heard it, loud enough to cut through the music. He doesn't deserve intimacy from me. Laughter fizzled. The group went quiet, real quiet, like someone had pulled the needle off a record. I froze. My ears rang with it, as if the words themselves had weight, heavy, sharp, designed to cut through the air and land right in my chest. I didn't move, didn't say anything, but I felt my face tighten, the same way you brace when someone throws a drink in it. Not because it hurts, but because everyone's watching. Laura was grinning, half drunk, basking in her own boldness. That was when it happened. Amy stepped forward, and with a shrug and a voice so calm it cut sharper than anything else, she said, "Then I guess he'll get it from me." Silence dropped like a curtain. You could hear someone cough. A beer can crack. Nothing else. Laura's smile faltered. She blinked like she couldn't process what just happened, like she'd dropped a grenade, and someone else picked it up and pulled the second pin. I turned toward Amy, heart pounding, unsure if I was more shocked by her words or the way she said them. Cool, certain, unbothered. She didn't even look at Laura. She just turned to me, gave the faintest smile, and walked past the crowd, heading toward the driveway. And I followed, not because I knew what I was doing, but because standing still didn't feel like an option anymore. We walked without talking until we reached her car, parked along the curb, tucked under a street lamp. She leaned against the driver's side door, crossing her arms as if daring me to ask. I didn't. Instead, I looked back toward the yard. Through the hedges, I could just make out Laura, frozen in place, her face blank with something like panic. "You didn't have to do that," I finally said. Amy tilted her head. "Didn't I? I mean, she was just humiliating you?" Amy interrupted, her voice even. "In front of people who were pretending not to listen, but definitely were?" "Yeah, I noticed." I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut in again, gently, but firmly. "You didn't deserve that, Mark. No one does." For a moment, we just stood there in the glow of the street lamp, the muffled party still buzzing in the background. I felt like a statue, anchored by confusion, gratitude, embarrassment, something I couldn't name. Amy's eyes softened. "Look, I wasn't trying to stir things up," she said, "but I've watched you carry that marriage like it's a backpack full of rocks. And I don't care what anyone says. Love isn't supposed to bruise." I swallowed hard. She reached for the door handle. "Need a ride?" I hesitated for a second, then nodded. As I climbed into the passenger's seat, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't walking out of something broken. I was walking toward something real. Amy didn't start the car right away. We sat there beneath a blanket of stars, the night pressing in softly, like it wanted us to speak but wouldn't rush us. Neither of us moved. The silence wasn't tense. It wasn't awkward. It was calm. The kind of silence that lets you breathe for the first time after holding it too long. She glanced over at me, her fingers tapping gently on the steering wheel. "You okay?" I looked down at my hands. "I don't know." Amy nodded slowly, like she understood more than I could say. That was hard to watch. She shouldn't have said that. I gave a small, tired laugh. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that it didn't surprise me. Her eyes stayed on mine for a moment too long. "You deserve better." We talked. Not about the party. Not about Laura. But about life. about how Amy never expected to be the one in her family defending someone else's marriage, about how she used to think love looked a certain way, candlelit dinners, grand gestures, until she realized the real stuff was found in small kindnesses and consistency. I told her I used to think the same. We talked for nearly an hour, windows down, the warm summer air wrapping around us like a secret. She told me how she'd noticed the way Laura looked through me, not at me. I admitted I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. At one point, our hands brushed on the center console. Neither of us pulled away, but we didn't kiss. There was no sudden romance, no dramatic moment, just a shared breath, a pause where maybe something could have happened, but didn't. Because sometimes, the most important intimacy isn't physical. It's being able to sit with someone in the middle of your storm and not feel alone. Eventually, I sighed and sat back. I should head home. Amy nodded, but her voice was soft. Do you want to? That question hit harder than I expected. Because I didn't know. I looked at her one last time, really looked, and said, "Thanks for standing up for me tonight." Her smile was small, but sincere. You never needed me to, but I wanted to. She dropped me at the end of the driveway. I watched her taillights fade into the dark, and when I stepped through the front door, Laura was in the kitchen, phone in her hand, acting like nothing had happened. She didn't even ask where I'd been. But for once, I didn't care, because I hadn't been lost. I just found the first piece of myself again. The next morning felt off, not in a dramatic way. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just something in the air that didn't match the sunshine spilling through the windows. A disconnect, like the house itself was holding its breath. Laura stood in the kitchen in her robe, scrolling through her phone as she stirred creamer into her coffee. The clink of the spoon against the mug was too steady, too performative, like she needed the sound to fill the space between us. "Morning," she said casually, without looking up. "Morning," I replied, setting my keys on the counter with a little more force than necessary. She sipped her coffee and glanced over, the flicker of a smile on her lips. Too smooth, too practiced. "Sleep okay?" I looked at her, really looked. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and the corner of her mouth twitched just enough to betray her calm. "I did," I said. "You?" She shrugged. "Couch isn't great, but you know that already." The silence stretched a beat too long. I opened the fridge, grabbed a water bottle, and leaned against the counter. That's when I noticed her phone light up on the island behind her. Group chat notifications. 3 in a row. Then nothing. Laura reached for it quickly, swiped the screen, then hesitated. Her thumb hovered for a second longer than it should have before she set it face down. That's when I knew. Something was unraveling. She still hadn't mentioned the party. Not a word about the joke she made, or Amy's reply, or the way everyone's eyes had shifted away from her after the silence swallowed the yard. But the signs were there. That morning, her phone didn't buzz as often. And when it did, the messages came with hesitation, half smiles that vanished before they reached her eyes. I watched her flip through her apps like she was trying to find a place to belong. Eventually, she set the phone down and looked at me. "You're quiet." I took a sip of water. "So are you." She tried to brush it off with a light laugh. "We don't always have to talk, Mark. Some mornings can just be." But this wasn't silence born of comfort. This was something else. This was her realizing that her words, that loud, cruel moment at the party, hadn't just hit me. They'd landed everywhere. And people were reacting. I didn't have to say anything. The shift was happening without my help. I just had to let it. Around noon, I checked my phone and saw 2 unread messages from a couple of our neighbors. "You okay, man? Just wanted to say I saw how she talked to you." Wasn't right. Simple words. But they meant more than I expected. I didn't reply, just stared at the screen, then looked over at Laura, who was now texting furiously, her jaw clenched. She looked up and caught me watching. "What?" "Nothing." "No, seriously." "What?" "I just wonder," I said, keeping my voice calm, "if you even remember what you said." Her eyes narrowed, but the confidence behind them cracked. "It was a joke. Don't tell me you're going to hold on to that." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She scoffed, stood up, and started collecting plates from the table even though breakfast had been over for hours. People are too sensitive these days. They act like one comment means the whole world is ending. I let the silence answer for me. Her mask slipped just a little more. Later that day, I walked past her phone on the counter. Group chat still open. Only this time, the messages had changed. No new invites, just threads with unread replies. And one from someone named Kara that read, "You should probably apologize." That wasn't okay. Laura hadn't replied. She just stood at the sink, washing a single coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She didn't know it yet, but the consequences had already started. Not with a blow-up, not with a door slamming, but with the slow, cold silence of people choosing who to believe. And me? I was finally okay with letting her feel it. Amy and I didn't plan it. That was the first thing I told myself. We didn't plan the weekly meetups at the cafe tucked behind the grocery store or the walks through the park on Sunday afternoons. It just happened, naturally, without pretense, without guilt. Two people figuring out how to breathe again. It started small. She texted me a meme one morning, something about middle-aged knees and stairs. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. Not because it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, but because it felt light, easy. We met at the cafe later that week. She wore a loose cream sweater and didn't try to dress up. I like that. She didn't show up with a mask. She just showed up. Still with the black coffee, she teased, sliding into the booth across from me. Still with the peppermint tea? I shot back. That's how it was. Friendly. Familiar. But underneath it, something warmer simmered. Not passion, not lust. Just comfort. Recognition. We talked about family mostly. Her childhood with Laura. How their parents always favored appearances over honesty. How Amy learned early on to read between people's words. I told her how my parents divorced when I was 14 and how I swore I'd never repeat their silence. She listened without interrupting. That alone felt like a gift. As the weeks passed, I noticed things. Amy always made room for my words, never rushed me. She didn't try to fix me or spin a moral out of everything. She just let me feel. And I realized that's what I'd been missing. Not affection, not even love, just the right to exist next to someone without performing. One evening, after a longer walk through the Arboretum trails, we sat on a bench near the pond. Ducks floated lazily by. Kids chased each other in the distance. It was golden hour, and the sun dripped soft amber over everything. Amy turned to me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you still want to save your marriage?" The question hit me in the chest. Not like an accusation, more like a mirror I'd been avoiding. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "There's a difference between staying and surviving." She nodded slowly, looking ahead. I respect that you've been careful, that you're not rushing anything, that you still believe in vows." I looked at her. "I do. Or I did. But a vow takes two people. One person can't keep it alone." That was the closest I'd come to admitting it out loud, that the man who still believed in marriage was starting to believe in himself more. Amy smiled gently, like she understood. And that's when I knew something vital had shifted. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I wasn't hoping Laura would notice the hole she'd carved in our life. Because Amy didn't just notice the hole. She saw me through it. And when someone sees you like that, without flinching, without asking you to shrink, it makes you question why you ever settled for being invisible in the first place. It started as something simple. I was looking for the old lantern, the one we used during that power outage last winter. Laura had stashed it somewhere, and with storms in the forecast again, I figured I'd better be ready. The attic smelled the way forgotten things do, like cardboard, dust, and time. I pulled the chain on the bare bulb, lights spilling over piles of seasonal decorations and boxes we hadn't touched since the move. I wasn't expecting to find anything that mattered. Then I saw it. A shoebox, tucked behind a stack of wrapping paper tubes, and a cracked Halloween bucket. Nothing on the outside. Just plain, brown cardboard. But the second I opened it, I knew. At first, it was innocent. A few old Valentine's cards, the kind with glitter hearts and cheesy puns. Then came the notes, flirtatious, handwritten, folded the way teenagers do in class. And then, at the bottom, under a crumpled envelope, were the photos. 5 of them. Laura smiling, with another man, arm around her waist, lips on her cheek. The timestamps were burned into the corners of each photo like scars. And that's what made my heart stop. Because they were dated from earlier this year, right around the time she stopped touching me, stopped laughing with me, stopped trying. My hands were shaking, not with rage, not with sorrow, with something deeper, a cold, measured awareness. Because suddenly, all the missing pieces clicked into place. Her distance, her mockery, Her cruel little joke at the party. It wasn't just emotional drift. It was cover. A distraction to make sure I blamed myself instead of noticing the truth. I sat on the attic floor with that box in my lap, the bulb above me buzzing faintly, casting a yellow glow over evidence I hadn't asked for but now couldn't ignore. And I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stared. Because there's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't erupt, it settles. Like a weight you weren't supposed to carry, but now realize has been there the whole time. Eventually, I tucked everything back into the box. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew exactly what I had to do next. When I finally climbed down from the attic, Laura was in the living room watching TV, legs curled up beneath her, phone face down on the cushion beside her. She looked up, but only briefly. "You find the lantern?" "Not yet," I said, and I walked past her without another word. She didn't notice the shift in my voice. She didn't notice the stillness in my steps. But something in me had gone quiet. That sharp, unsettled craving to be seen by her, gone. I wasn't searching anymore. I was preparing. The kitchen smelled like oranges and dish soap. Laura stood at the sink, humming some off-key tune as she rinsed a glass, completely unaware of the man walking into the room with a box of broken trust and a folder of finality. I didn't speak right away. I just stood there, watching her from the doorway. The woman I'd built a life with, memorized from 1,000 mornings and a million familiar routines. But this morning, she was a stranger wearing Laura's skin. "Laura," I said. She turned, still drying the glass with a towel. "Hey, did you find that lantern?" I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the stack of papers on the counter between us. Crisp, clean, definitive. Her eyes dropped to them. She blinked once. Then again. "What is this?" Her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what it is." The towel slipped from her hands, landing in the sink with a soft splash. She stepped closer, scanning the top page, her mouth parting slightly as she read the bolded words. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." "Mark," she started, voice thin, shaky. "Wait, what is this?" "I'm not going to scream. I'm not even going to ask why," I said, my voice calm, too calm. "Because I found the cards. And the photos. I know." She went pale instantly, like the words knocked the air from her lungs. She stammered. "I can explain." "No," I said, cutting gently but firmly. "You really can't." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She reached for the papers like she needed proof it was really happening. Her fingers brushed the corner, then fell away. Tears welled in her eyes, fast and clumsy, like they hadn't been rehearsed. "Mark, please. I didn't mean for any of that to what?" I asked. "To be discovered? Or to matter?" She collapsed into the chair at the table like her legs had given out. "I still love you." That line, so automatic, so worn, almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was empty. A placeholder for a truth she didn't want to face. "I believe you loved the comfort I gave you," I said. "The stability. The silence. You loved knowing I wouldn't leave." She buried her face in her hands. "You don't understand. I've been so alone." I cut in. "So you filled the space. You chose someone else and left me to sleep beside a ghost. You laughed at me, mocked me, humiliated me." She lifted her head, mascara already streaking. "I made a mistake. I messed up, but I'm still here. Doesn't that count for anything?" I shook my head, steady. "No. Staying after the damage isn't love. It's guilt. And guilt doesn't build anything." Her shoulders slumped. I slid the papers toward her gently. "I signed them this morning. All that's left is you." She stared at them like they were a foreign language. "You're really going to walk away?" "I already did. You just didn't notice." I turned to leave, but then stopped at the doorway, looking back one last time. "By the way, I never needed revenge, Laura. You were always going to be your own consequence." And with that, I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, quiet but final. Outside, the air smelled like rain and something cleaner, something new. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew this. I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's choices anymore. The road ahead was quiet. Not the kind of eerie quiet that makes you feel small. No, this was something softer. Like the world had finally stopped shouting. The lines on the highway stretched forward, endless and open, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to turn around. I drove with the windows halfway down, one hand on the wheel, the other resting beside me, fingers tapping against the door to some faint melody the radio was humming. And then, almost like muscle memory, I reached for my phone. Amy's name was still pinned to the top of my messages, a single unread text glowing like a lantern. I know things are shifting, but if you ever want to talk, or just sit and not talk, I'm here. Simple. No pressure. Just her, showing up again without expectation. I called. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." There was a pause. Not awkward, just real. Like we both knew what this meant and weren't rushing it. "Want to grab lunch?" I asked. Somewhere quiet. I could hear the smile in her voice before she even spoke. "I was hoping you'd call." We met at a small place off Main Street. Half cafe, half bookstore, the kind of place where people whisper even when they don't have to. She was already there when I arrived, sipping tea, her hair pulled back loosely, a book turned face down beside her plate. She stood when she saw me, gave me a small, steady hug. No words, just that soft squeeze that says more than language ever could. I sat down across from her, and for a moment we just looked at each other. There was no need to rush the conversation. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Getting there." Her eyes scanned mine, like she was checking for cracks in the foundation. And maybe there were still a few, but they didn't feel like weaknesses anymore. They felt like space for new things to grow. We ate slowly, talked even slower, about the strange beauty of starting over, about the pain of leaving a life you once prayed would last, about the difference between being wanted and being chosen, and how I'd spent too many years mistaking one for the other. "I used to think love meant never leaving," I said quietly. Amy tilted her head. "And now I think, maybe love starts when you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable." She reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. "No hesitation. No agenda. You didn't fail, Mark," she said. "You just stopped pretending." And somehow, that landed deeper than any apology Laura ever could have offered. After lunch, we walked to her car, the same old beat-up Corolla she'd driven to that birthday party weeks ago, the night everything cracked open. We stood in the parking lot a moment longer than necessary. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted. Amy smiled. "You don't have to." She leaned in, resting her forehead lightly against mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Thanksgiving came fast. Too fast, maybe. One moment, I was signing papers. The next, I was carving out a new rhythm in a life that no longer orbited someone else's moods. The leaves turned. The house got quieter, but not the heavy, hollow quiet I once knew. This one had breathing room. When Amy invited me to her family's Thanksgiving, I hesitated. "It's just food," she said. "No pressure. No announcements. You don't even have to bring anything. Just come." I brought a pie anyway. Store-bought. Still warm. As we pulled up to her parents' house, an old colonial with a wraparound porch and a smell that hit you with cinnamon the second the door opened, I realized I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like someone returning to something good. Her family welcomed me with ease, like they'd all quietly decided they were done choosing sides. Maybe they'd chosen before I ever stepped through the door. We stepped into the dining room, a long oak table dressed in autumn colors, surrounded by laughter and the low hum of conversation. Amy touched my arm lightly as she guided me to the seat beside hers. Her hand stayed there a beat longer than necessary. Then the room went still. Laura walked in. Late. Alone. She looked thinner. Not physically, but like someone had trimmed away the parts of her that drew energy from others. She wore a polite smile, the kind people wear when they've been talked about but pretend they haven't noticed. Her eyes landed on me. Then Amy. Then our hands, casually close on the table. She said nothing, just nodded and took a seat near the far end, between two distant cousins who barely glanced her way. Dinner was served. The clatter of silverware, the soft murmur of stories, the sounds of a family doing what families do when they're whole. And through it all, Laura sat in silence, sipping her wine, occasionally reaching for the breadbasket like that could anchor her to something that still felt familiar. But no one leaned in. No one asked what she'd been up to. No one filled the silence she once controlled with sarcasm or sharp glances, because the room had shifted, and not in her favor. At one point, I caught her staring across the table. Not at me, not at Amy, But at the space we occupied together, the ease, the quiet laughter, the subtle looks exchanged without fear. She wasn't angry. She was empty. That's when I knew. There would never be a dramatic apology. No last-minute redemption arc. Laura's consequences didn't come in flames. They came in silence, in eyes that no longer flicked toward her for approval, in conversations that went on without her, in a holiday that felt full, even though she was right there. Later that evening, after dessert, Amy and I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, crisp, brimming with that post-feast stillness. She handed me a mug of cider and leaned against the railing. "You okay?" she asked. I looked back through the window, at the laughter, the candlelight, the seat Laura had left vacant without anyone noticing. "Yeah," I said. "I am." Amy rested her head on my shoulder. And just like that, the night closed in, not with finality, but with clarity. I'd spent years begging someone to see me, and now I was surrounded by people who never looked away. So here's what I know. You don't always get closure in the form of an apology. Sometimes you get it in the way people choose to stay and how others quietly fade. Sometimes the loudest justice is living well where they can see you. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. What would you have done if you were Mark? Let's talk about it.